Okay, welcome to part one of this guided tour for the Boilermaker code scaffold. I'm Gabriel, and I'm an instructor here.
My name's Dakota.
He's also an instructor. And we're going to start with top-level files, getting the repo set up, understanding the dev environment, etc. So what have we got cloned down so far?
So currently I have cloned the Boilermaker repository. I have its top-level files here. And I have a remote. As it's cloned, it's been pulled down with the full stack remote as origin. But I think we want to change that, is that right?
Yeah, so we want the students not to fork. If they fork Boilermaker, the problem is every time they open a pull request, that ends up by default in our repo on full stack, which we don't like. So what we're going to do instead is, right now we have our local project, which is a remote that points back up to full stack. We're going to add a remote that points to our own project on GitHub. So let's go make that.
Great. Okay. So with that, I just hit the plus here, new repository. And we'll call it Boilermaker.
We're going to do a bakery. So yeah, that looks good. Very important, we don't initialize with a README or anything, so it's a completely blank project. It has no prior commits. Okay, and we're going to add this repo, this GitHub project as a remote, a new remote to our existing repo.
Can I rename origin?
Yes. Git remote, rename origin. Let's call it full stack. That's a good idea.
Yeah. Just paste that. Great.
I think we need a name. Yeah. So this will be origin. And if we check it out, what's our Git remote v look like now? So the v's for verbose. All right, we got two remotes. Full stack points to the original project, but origin now points to our project. Awesome. Great. So let's open this up in your code editor and take a look at what our top level files are.
Sure. Should I push at this point?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, let's sync up with our GitHub repo.
Okay, so I want to git push. I'm gonna do -u so I track my branch origin, which now this is my origin master, and this should make the changes in GitHub as long as I'm logged in appropriately.
Looks like it was successful.
And if I just hit reload, we'll see there.
Nice. So we've got the same history as before.
Mm-hmm. Starting off with 227 commits.
Yeah. Another reason we like to do it this way, by the way, is if a full stack constructor in the future updates the original Boilermaker, this makes it a lot easier to pull from the full stack remote and get those changes. We used to have an NPM package called FSG, Full Stack Generator, back when we did Angular and MeanStack. But that was really difficult if we had a bug fix or something. People had to go manually add the changes.
Right.
Okay, let's start poking around. And where do you like to start, Dakota, when you're looking at a new node project?
Yeah, so this is a new node project that I've never seen before. Every node project has to have a Package.json, and that really tells me a lot about what's going on. So I'm just going to open that. Got pancakes on the mind. Right here. Great. So okay. I'm in Vim, and I can do different things here if I want to make the screen longer. So I can see that some of these lines are clipped. We probably won't get to those right now, but later on we'll be able to look at those in full.
Sure, and what I completely agree with you. Package.json, it should be the first place you look for any kind of node-based project. It's got not only dependencies, which are interesting, but also I find that scripts are often like one of the most important things to check out. So let's take a look here. We've got some build stuff, which runs Webpack, a deploy script that we'll check that out later, some kind of dev stuff like linting and prettify, also some hooks, pre-commit post-install. So hooks are scripts that in theory will automatically run at certain points. And we'll have to explain the difference between some of the hooks come built in with Node, like post-install, but pre-commit actually comes from a dependency called Husky. Seeding for our database, testing should be self-explanatory, and then we have a bunch of start scripts. So I think a lot of students will make the mistake sometimes, and myself, I'll make this mistake, of running npm start. But in reality, start just starts the back end, not the front end. So if we're developing, we'll use the start dev script, which is going to do both the client build and the server. Let's see, what do we want to start with here? I guess we could try we do like a split screen? Can we have a terminal and the editor at the same time?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go to the project directory. And I think what I would like to do before we run any of the scripts is take a look at the other top-level files that come along with this stuff. So
now I don't think that these are the only files that are there.
That's correct. There are some dot files.
Yeah. So I need to actually show all of them. So ls1a will show me everything. It shows me these special files. This is a path meaning here. This is a path meaning my parent directory, and the rest of these are specific. Let me bring that up a bit. Okay. So we know that these always exist, but this is what's specific to Boilermaker.
Yeah, with a very small exception, which is I see there's a .package.json.swap. That's a Vim temporary file for editing. So you won't have that file. And if you see other swap files during this video series, that's just while we're in Vim.
Let me update my gitignore so that we can just ignore those.
Good call.
We'll look at gitignore later, I guess, maybe. But.
Yeah. So really top level kind of navigation here. babelrc are going to be settings for how to transpile and compile our front end code so that we can use new features but in old browsers. Editorconfig is any editors that understand it will automatically set their settings vis-a-vis things like tabs and spaces and how many lines to indent and things like that. ESLintrc is the config file for our linter, telling us what rules to follow or not. .git is, of course, where our Git repo actually lives, where all the commits exist. .github is a little bit different. .github is a folder. Let's take a look at what's inside it. So there are 3 files in here: contributing, issue template, and pull request template. This is specific to the GitHub website. When we make issues and pull requests, it can pre-populate the editing window with some markdown content. Templates like, please put your issue here and don't forget to check off these checkboxes and stuff like that. It's a nicety that's specific to just one website, so it's not necessarily something every project needs or wants. And I don't think we have to look any more at it. What else we got? Prettier ignore is saying what files Prettier, our formatting engine, will not run on. prettierrc are the settings for Prettier. Travis YAML is going to be an interesting one. That'll come up a lot when we talk about continuous integration and deployment. License, we use the MIT license. Let's take a look at it. It's basically in 2 big parts. So the MIT license I saw summarized one day as the first part is, this is the part we say you can do whatever you want. And the second part is this part where we say, this is the part where you can't sue us for it. So that's basically the MIT license in a nutshell. We want you all to feel comfortable using Boilermaker as the start of your own projects without feeling like Full Stack is going to own any part of it.
Now, I noticed that whenever I start my own node projects, it lists ISC.
Yeah.
What is that one?
I actually don't know. That's a good question. Like I've seen it as the default before. I have no idea why they chose ISC as the default. I find that in the open source community, MIT is far and away the most popular, probably because it's one of the simplest and most liberal, but it still covers yourself in case of like that you have no liability if you use it.
Right. So I think that the ISC is, if I remember correctly, derivative of MIT at some point.
Wikipedia says it's functionally equivalent to simplified BSD at MIT.
So you're probably okay. Just node init, is that, or npm init? Right?
Yeah,
npm
I'm sure it will be fine. I'm not a lawyer, so can't claim otherwise.
But yeah, so this one's MIT. It's good to know.
We've got a README, which has some good information and advice in it. And then we've got our folders for our actual source code, as well as a Webpack config.
Now, if I didn't know this was a node project to begin with, like if I didn't know anything about Package.json, then the first place I would have gone was the README. And that's what GitHub does by default. It shows you exactly what's in the README. And there's a lot, I mean, it tells you everything that you're supposed to be doing, that we're doing right now in the README. And a good project will have an up-to-date README that keeps everything in one spot, tells people who aren't familiar with the project what to do and how to use it.
Yeah, don't skip the documentation. Developers complain all the time about missing or bad documentation. Well, the flip side of that is if you complain about bad documentation, you should rejoice at good documentation.
Exactly. Yep.
And take advantage of it. So you mentioned gitignore a second ago. Why don't we start there?
Sure. Okay. So, well, let me. So I'm going to do git status, and you can see that I modified my gitignore. So I'm going to do something real quick. I'm going, but I'm right behind. I need to switch the order of these windows. Can I do that? Oh, I don't know.
I don't know how to use OS X's full screen window management.
Yeah. Oh, I lost it.
I think it's one full screen over.
Yeah, it's fine. I'll just do it here. Okay,
sure.
So I have git status, and now what I want to do is I want to reset to what was there before, and I can use git reset to do that, but maybe I forgot everything I want to do, so I'm going to do git reset help. It's going to tell me something. Let's try it this way. Yeah, that helps a little more. Git reset, and I want to use hard, and what this is going to do is this is going to say forget everything here and just return to what's in the repository, and then I need to also give it a commit, and just like the dot is here for the directory, head, all caps, is here for a git commit. So I'm going to do git reset hard head, and that's going to get rid of all possible changes in my remote. It says head is now at this commit.
Yeah, by the way, be careful with this command, everybody, because this does remove information that you cannot get back.
Yep, this is like delete and don't tell me anything, or don't ask. So be sure to commit as frequently as possible. All right.
Now, interesting, I thought you did add a swap file. Oh, that's right. Now that we reset, that swap file is no longer in our gitignore.
Exactly, right. So let me rearrange these windows to where they're back in the same place, so we can look at them both at the same time. Now there's some argument as to how to use your gitignore file. Some people would say using it to ignore swap files is an abuse, but just let's just talk about what it's currently ignoring.
Sure. So node modules, this is debatable. Mm-hmm. Some people say you should check in your node modules, and the reason they say that is because the idea is if at any point in the future, maybe 100 years from now, NPM no longer exists, but in theory, somebody would still want to be able to build and compile and run your program.
I see.
If those dependencies go away, now it's useless code. I don't agree with that in a practical sense. I think that you'd have plenty of warning if NPM was about to stop existing, and people could figure out what to do then. But the idea is, since node modules, you can always download them again. And in theory, if you spec their versions properly with like a package lock or something, you can always get the exact same versions again. It would be a huge waste of space and time downloading and on GitHub servers to just repeat node modules all over the place.
And they're artifacts of a build process, right? Like that's the line that I've heard is like any artifacts of a build process, you can ignore those, and that's what sets the swap files apart, because that's like an editor specific thing, so people don't like that.
Definitely.
But right now I don't have any node modules folder here.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Maybe we should npm install.
All right, so that's another good way if you want to run something in a random node package. Well, that's the first step.
Yeah. So other things that are being ignored right now are bundle.js and bundle.js.map. The bundle is our built client-side code, which Webpack takes our source code and compiles it into a bundle. That would definitely be a repeat, a copy, a build based on code that already exists in our repo. So that would be redundant information, which we can always just build again ourselves. Mm-hmm. So it makes sense to ignore that. The .map is called a source map, and we're going to see later when we talk about client-side code how source maps make it easier for us to debug in something like Chrome. Secrets.js, as the name suggests, is something you don't want to end up in GitHub. It's going to contain our API keys, basically client passwords and usernames that our server uses to communicate with services like Google or other APIs. DS store files are a stupid OS X like meta thing for folders that says like how big your icons are and where you've dragged them to inside the folder. That has nothing to do with our program. And then we got some log files like debug log and yarn error log and things like that.
So we were talking about npm, and we just did npm install. Yarn is another competing package manager, is that right?
Yeah, so Yarn came out a little while ago when npm was on an earlier version. npm was a little bit slower, and a problem with npm was if two different people on 2 different days did npm install, you would be able to specify the versions of your dependencies that you wanted, but you didn't control what versions of dependencies those dependencies themselves wanted. So every time you npm installed, you could get a bunch of different versions of subfiles and subdependencies,
right,
based on the version ranges. So this is problematic because you'd have different behavior just because you installed on different days. And that was a development kind of nightmare. Facebook came out with Yarn, which is a wrapper around the npm registry. It uses the same database of packages. It's not a separate registry, but it's a separate tool for installing those packages. It did 2 things that were clever. It did a lot of performance enhancements with good caching, so it was way faster than npm at that point. And it had a lock file, yarn.lock, which said not only what versions of your dependencies you had, but all of their dependencies and their dependencies recursively, fixing every single version to an exact version. So that every time you did yarn install, you would get the same tree of dependencies. Now, this put a lot of pressure on npm to upgrade and improve. So npm added their own package lock.json, and they bumped up the speed and did a lot of caching themselves. And now the 2 projects are, pretty comparable. So rather than add more complexity to our curriculum, we say just everybody use npm.
Yeah, and this package lock file, it's got a lot of info in here.
Yeah.
And this is automatically generated by npm.
Right.
Is that right? So you want to avoid editing it, right? You should let npm do all the editing.
Usually. There are sometimes when people on Stack Overflow suggest that to solve this or that problem, like a security issue or an audit or whatever that npm now does, you can go and directly hack packagelock.json, and then you got to verify that it's like the integrity of package lock is still valid, and it's kind of an annoying chore. This reminds me, do you have the npm merge driver installed?
I don't think so.
So let's Google that, because that's a really good thing for everyone to have. Very often when we're working in a team, yep, that's it. We will have 2 people have installed different things, generating 2 different lock files. And sometimes those lock files will conflict. And solving merge conflicts in a package lock is a really big pain. Mm-hmm. This is a driver that makes it automatic. When a merge conflict could happen in a npm package lock, most of the time, this driver will automatically know how to reconcile 2 lock files, and we'll do it for you. So they suggest running npx.
Nope, I didn't do install.
Yeah. If we go back to, do you have npx?
No.
So yeah, npx means run the npm merge driver command without having to install it first.
Gotcha.
So it temporarily downloads and installs it just for the sake of running it. But you need npx in order to do that. So if you can't run this, just npm install globally npx, and then you can do it. All right, looks like it worked.
Yeah. It must come along with npm now, because I don't remember installing it.
So that's funny. I do remember installing it, but if it's automatic, then that's great.
But it could just be a holdover from another global package that I've installed.
Totally true.
I like to avoid global packages whenever possible, but this is a tool that makes sense to install globally.
Yeah. By the way, we see some command line output that seems to make it suggest that it was successful. Mm-hmm. How can you tell in the command line if a command was actually successful?
Well, there's a return code, and that's the first place I would go. I would say, what was the last return code? And 0, that unlike almost everywhere else, is success. Right. Non-zero is failure.
Yeah.
So
some people have fancy schmancy terminal prompts that have color codes and things like that you'll see it's green for good and red for bad. And if you're red-green colorblind, that's unfortunate. But you can always do echo $question, and it'll tell you if the last command was successful.
Yeah, it's a special bash variable that just keeps that one value, whatever the last return code was. So one of my favorite commands that fails is cat-c. Because it just doesn't exist, and it will say that doesn't work.
Okay.
So
sure. Awesome. Okay, so we've made some progress. We've looked at our gitignore. We wanted to ignore swap files. We can go add that line. The lines that go into gitignore, by the way, are they're kind of shell globs, but the problem I have personally with shell globs is that every tool out there that says they use shell globs uses a slightly different syntax for globs.
Mm-hmm.
And that lack of standardization can sometimes be confusing. So there is documentation for it. I don't think we should spend too much time for it, but yeah, this is exactly the kind of stuff we would want.
Yeah, but if I want to ignore all things that end in .swp, I can do star.swp and it works.
Great. Got that wild card in there. All right, next let's take a look at the linting config.
Sure.
This project, Boilermaker, comes with ESLint integration out of the box. And that exists in several places. First of all, we have some dev dependencies. So let's check that out.
Oh, the dev dependencies?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so the dev dependencies that are relevant here are ESLint, config full stack, config prettier, plugin React. And I think that's pretty much, yeah, that's everything that's relevant to the linting.
Mm-hmm.
In our scripts, there is a script that I've set up called lint. Let's go look at what that does. So that runs ESLint on this directory, but ignoring anything specified by gitignore. So it's not going to bother looking. By default, I don't think ESLint looks in node modules. I could be misremembering, but it's definitely not going to go look in node modules now. It's
or
also
our
not
bundle,
gonna
for instance.
Yes, exactly. There's another version of lint here called lintfix, which runs the linting script passing the -- fix command to ESLint. And that can be useful because sometimes ESLint can actually automatically fix the things it complains about for certain very trivial rules, usually like no-brainer, like there's no chance that it could break by changing the code.
Right. And so you're passing this flag to actually this command by using this other double hyphen.
Yeah, this is composing NPM scripts.
Right.
So it's kind of an annoying thing, but once you learn it, you just know it. You can do in a script, npm run some other script, and then pass command line arguments, but with that extra double hyphen.
And that's a familiar pattern to people who are familiar with shell. Like
Sure.
some shell commands do that. Usually it's to specify like another file. So git, for instance, if you're doing a diff between two places, but you only want to look at one file, you can do that double hyphen, specify the file name, and it does that. So the double hyphen is useful in many circumstances, but it's one of those really hard to Google things.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just try running this in the command line. In theory, it should give us nothing because we haven't actually changed our code.
Okay.
So when you're running anything but start and test, you need to do npm run. That's another thing Yarn did better, by the way. If you do yarn command name, it'll check to see if you've defined a script with that name.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so we did ESLint and it was successful. It didn't find any problems. The next thing I want to take a look at is our eslintrc. Like, let's look at the config for this thing.
Sure.
Okay, so it's got root true, and that means it's not going to use anybody's global ESLint settings. When you're working on a project like this, you want the only settings for these dev tools to be based on the project itself. Mm-hmm. You don't want people's individual settings overriding that.
Right.
It extends 3 configs. The first is the full stack config, which is just a bunch of kind of sane defaults that we set up for educational reasons. And then Prettier and Prettier React are kind of anti-configs. They turn off a whole bunch of rules. And the reason is Prettier, our formatter, is going to be responsible for actually changing those rules around. And we don't want ESLint complaining about Prettier's choices. So we set up a bunch of rules of full stack. We turn off some of those rules with Prettier. Prettier will handle those automatically, and full stack will handle the remainder.
Right. Great.
And then we've got an example rule that's currently off, which is the semicolon rule. So it's not checking if you use semicolons or not, it just doesn't care. If we wanted to warn at like a yellow level, we would put 1, and error, which could fail scripts, would be level 2.
Cool. Yeah, I prefer no semicolons at this point in JavaScript's development. I feel like at one point it was really useful to have it, but I think that they're vestiges of another era.
Sure. I personally agree. I've tried tabs and spaces. I've tried semicolons and no semicolons. I think that it's better to actually, like, for at least a number of months, try out a style before you decide against or for it.
Yeah.
So personal style aside, we've set it up so it's agnostic here.
And then you can encode your preference in Prettier. And
exactly.
Then you don't have to think about it ever again.
Exactly. Okay, so let's do a quick example. Do you have ESLint integrated into Vim by chance?
I believe so, yes.
That's really cool. So let's go do a quick example. Let's open up some JavaScript file in the package. I don't know where.
Let's see. Well, that's a good question. Where should we open it? Okay, so I have... this is... Oops. Let's try this. Okay, there we go. These are all my directories.
Yeah. Maybe something in server.
In server? All right. So let's go there. Server index.js I think might be a good place to start.
Sure.
Okay. Great.
All right. Let's do something that it would complain about, like
unused identifier.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
If I have an unused variable, it should complain, right?
I think so.
Yeah. So.
All right.
So now it's complaining, and once I write, you can see it. It's unfortunately behind me. So yeah. Never used.
Right.
So.
And by the way, notice that error message is prefixed with the name of the rule that's broken, which is no-unused-vars.
Exactly.
So what I wanted to show here is if we go back to our eslintrc, maybe we decide unused variables are fine. Who cares? I care, but if you didn't like that rule, if you thought it was just getting in the way, you could add it to this rules thing, and you just have to know the name, which is always printed in eslintrc.
Also, it's important that this is a JSON file, not a JavaScript file, so you can't have things like trailing commas here, for instance, or comments. That can...
Keys need to be double quoted,
yep,
etc.
So okay, so here we are again, and now you can see nothing happening.
Yep. All right, let's go reset and go
right.
back to where we're at. So now you've seen how ESLint is set up, how you can run the linter, check if there's a rule that's annoying and you disagree with, you can add it to your rule set and turn it off or turn down its severity. I think that covers most of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we didn't talk about actually configuring it for your editor, but that is
it's kind of
outside
the scope. Yeah, it's going to depend on if you're using Code or Sublime or Vim or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. But even if you don't have it for your editor, you can always do in the command line ESLint, npm run lint, and it'll run ESLint with the proper settings.
Yeah, let me show that with these settings. So Vim will complain, and then if I do npm run lint, it will also complain.
There we go. And it gives you a line number and a file and what thing was broken and what severity level and all that good information. What will we want to do next? Let's talk about, we talked about one half of the kind of style guide here, which is the linting. But there's another half, which is automatic formatting. So if we look at our prettify script, it's using the Prettier command, which is another dev dependency. So even if you don't have Prettier set up yourself, this project sets it up locally. And because it's in our dev dependencies, we can run it as if it was a global shell command. The way that npm does that, by the way, is every package that creates a command that you can actually execute, it puts into node modules /.bin for binary. So if we check that out, node modules.bin, yep, there's the Prettier command. And when you run an npm script, npm puts this .bin folder into your path, so you could just use those commands as if they were global commands. Now, Prettier is going to automatically format our JavaScript. And the settings for that are in our prettierrc. So let's go take a look at them.
Before we go that far, I want to say a little bit about the path variable.
Yeah, that's
so
a good point.
You were just talking about that. And that's this one. It's a special bash variable. It tells me where to look, or it tells bash where to look for executable files. And you can see I do have node modules.bin here, but I believe that I actually added that myself to my own bash profile.
Oh, so you always wanted it to, that's your global node modules, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't. What's this? Well, this is okay. I think that's right. Nope, that's history, of course. Oh man, that is in the worst spot. Underscore p tab. There we go. All right. Yeah. So I actually added myself because for some reason npm wasn't doing it for me, but it's good to have because then I can do something like Prettier version, and you can see this is actually a relative path. So whatever node package I'm in, it searches there at some point at the end. So.
Okay. So if we run it right now, since this project has already been prettified, it should tell us that there's just no changes. But let's, again, demonstrate this. If we open another JavaScript file, maybe mess around with the indentation, do some sort of silly formatting, and then run Prettier, it's going to fix it back for us.
Now, I tried to run it just by calling it without any arguments, and it gave me a help file. So how should... Let's see. Oh, I could look over here in the Package.json.
Yep.
To see how it's invoked. Okay. Okay. So Prettier is Prettier right. So if I do, oh, it's still complaining because I didn't give it any.
I think you need to give it a path. Yeah.
JavaScript. There we go. Cool. So I looked through both of those JavaScript files and said, okay, those are good. So yeah. So I could also give it the server index.js. Okay, and we can still play around in here. Okay. So what's a good thing that Prettier would try to fix for us?
Indentation level is always a fun one to mess with, I think. This is a really simple example.
Okay, so I changed that to tabs.
We got mixed tabs and spaces, it looks like.
Yeah, let's see what happens here. Okay, so this, instead of being gray, is now white. And I bet it changed the file under my nose. And Vim is trying to warn me that, oh yes, this file has changed on the file system. So I can load that, and then you can see it fixed it. It took it back.
Great.
So.
Now, we've set up some settings. If we look at our prettierrc file, which is in our top-level directory. Okay.
Oh, that's Prettier ignore.
That's the ignore, yeah.
There we go.
So the commented out lines, there's a reason they're commented out, which is that Prettier takes a look at several places for settings. One is this RC file, but another place is editorconfig. And I didn't want two files to be setting two different settings. So I only set the settings here that are not already set by editorconfig. I said semicolons should be off, so Prettier will actually strip out semicolons. Single quote was true, so instead of using double quotes in JavaScript, it'll use single quotes. And bracket spacing is false. That was a compromise with Tom, who also wrote a lot of Boilermaker, and he prefers parens and brackets to be very close with not a lot of white space. Mm-hmm. Prettier by default, not by default, by design, gives you very few settings. And the whole point of Prettier is to say everyone should stop debating about style in the first place and just have a machine that normalizes everything. Everybody's code becomes the pretty version at the end. And you shouldn't waste a lot of time deciding what the settings are. Mm-hmm. That's actually a really nice thing I've found to kind of just let go of that discussion and just say like, okay, you know what, my code's going to go through this, their code's going to go through it, everyone's code's going to go through it. What spits out at the end, I might not agree with every single decision Prettier makes, but the beautiful thing is I don't have to think about it anymore. It stops being something that I pay attention to or worry about. I can write however I want, and then it all gets normalized in the end. So not only does everybody's code conform to a single style automatically, but what I really love about this is that means every Git diff in a pull request, the only things that change are not style things, like nobody accidentally adds a whole bunch of semicolons, for instance. The only thing that you're going to see is content changes, actual changes to the code base and the meaning of the program. That's why I personally like Prettier a lot. Some people disagree strongly, and they don't like Prettier. So let's check out our Package.json because we've got a script in there that I want to show you.
Sure. So back in Package.json.
So in our pre-commit hook, there is a line which will run the lint staged command. The lint stage command, if you scroll down, is specified down here to run Prettier. This is currently off. And this was a compromise between myself and some other developers at FullStack. I really was for Prettier. They were against it. And we decided that, look, we'll put the code in there so that you can turn it on if you like it. But it's opt-in. It's not going to magically change things around without you understanding why. You have to decide, I do want this feature. So to turn this feature on, all we do is get rid of that little hash in pre-commit. Just that first one. Yep. And now, every time we would make a git commit, it's going to automatically first run it through Prettier and ESLint to make sure that it's normalized.
Very cool.
Let's do a really fast example of that. Maybe if we change something in like the client code, like our app.js or something.
Client app?
Yeah, let's take a look at that. So here we've got a div with navbar and routes. Let's add like a hypothetical h1 or something in there that's like hello, or who cares, some bit of extra code. And let's deliberately put this kind of in like a weird indentation that we imagine Prettier probably wouldn't like. And let's add this. Let's just add and commit and see what happens here.
Okay. So clear git status shows me all of the stuff. I only want to add app.js
and Package.json.
And Package.json. I prefer spelling out what I'm adding, but a lot of people like to do -A or just git add all. I like to do it like this.
For sure.
Yeah.
And also, I have a version of git add all that automatically tacks on an and git status.
Mm-hmm.
So after I've added, it immediately shows me what I've added, so that I never make the mistake of accidentally adding something I didn't intend.
Right, and once you've added it and all the names are green, you can actually still look at the diff here. Let me show you that git diff, but by using staged. And this shows you what has changed. And you can see Git is trying to warn me that, oh, there are tabs and spaces here. This is not right. And then also this has changed. So,
okay. Let's do the commit. And check out what happens here. Husky runs the pre-commit tag. The pre-commit tag runs lint staged. Lint staged runs Prettier. Prettier changes our files. If we now reload that file in your Vim editor, Prettier has automatically fixed the formatting before it went into the project.
Mm-hmm.
So this way, nobody ever needs to go back and fix the formatting after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And the only changes we see are the actual content changes, not style changes.
So when we look in the log, we will see my commit. Prettier test commit. And then if I want to just look at the diff there, I can do git. Again, head is where I'm at, head. And then, or maybe I want to do head -1. The tilde is like one, or this many back, and diff from that to head, and that should give me, oops, oh, I didn't type in diff. Yeah, this is the actual diff, and as you can see, there's no white space issues or anything like that based on what you said. It uses Prettier, it normalizes it, and that's really the only content that changed. I uncommented that line, and I added the hello world.
Yep. So I really like this feature. That's why I added it. If you think you would like this feature too, keep your team kind of all on the same page style-wise automatically, passively, without having to even think about it. Just make sure you uncomment that pre-commit script there. And then commit and make sure everybody's on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're almost done with our top-level files. We've got some really important ones, though. We've got our Webpack config and our babel.js. So let's take a look at those.
Okay. So let's put Webpack.
Cool. So this is the Webpack config. Dakota, what is Webpack and what do these keys and values mean?
So Webpack config, well, let's look and see how it's being used in Package.json. Right now, it's being used in these build client scripts. So it is, the way that we're using it is a command line tool to compile certain JavaScript written in one way to another way. In particular, we use a lot of modern syntax that the browsers may or may not support. And so what Webpack will do is it will compile or transpile that new modern syntax into an older syntax as we specify. And we are able to include things like Babel, which give it different types of dialects of things that we can use. That's kind of how I would start.
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary. I would, if anybody's confused about the distinction between Webpack and Babel, I would say that Webpack, its biggest goal right off the bat is it understands module syntax, so things like require and import, and it can fuse all those files together into a single runnable, browser runnable file. Babel is a plugin / compiler that Webpack can use to do the syntax translation you were talking about.
Right. And Webpack does some other things as well, like it'll minify and compress your JavaScript if you're working in a production-like environment, which is that's kind of a different step. Like the transpiling is one thing, and then after it's transpiled, well, you're going to have we'll see later. Sometimes you have a lot of extraneous stuff, and if you're serving something millions of times per day, you don't want to be putting all these extra characters that are just taking up bandwidth. So you can minify it and then also configure things differently with Webpack.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful tool with a lot of very advanced features. At this point in time that we're making this video, it's typical for Webpack projects to have a Webpack config. Lately, they've been trying to simplify the process of using it so that it can run even without a config. But let's take a look at ours and see what we've got. So right at the top, we've got this environment variable, process.env.nodeenv. And we're checking to see, are we in development mode or not? Now, I think that's interesting because we're checking, like, are we in development? How can you find out if you are in development mode, if your nodeenv is development?
Okay. I want to say a couple things before we get too far. Okay,
sure.
First off, this is a config file, but it's actually a JavaScript file. So we can write code in like this, like we have const as dev, process node in, etc. Most config files are not like that. Most config files are static. They're JSON files or something. So sometimes you can introduce bugs because of those sorts of things on accident.
Yep.
So again, and what you were saying is, how do I check to see if this is true to begin with? Well, it's going to depend on whatever this is, process.env.nodeenv. And this is, when I'm in Node, if I just run Node, there's a special object that's defined for me called process. And it tells me all sorts of information about how this thing was called. And as you can see, my first argument was Node. That's how it was called. And then process.env is going to be actually my environment variables, as we saw earlier. So if the one we saw earlier was path, and it should be able to, yeah, here's path. Here's my path right there. So if I'm not in Node, and I want to check that out, if I'm in Bash, or any sort of shell, anything that derives from sh, the shell, I can do echo $node env, and that will show me where I am.
Now, what's interesting here is you did that, and it shows nothing. So at first glance, this would seem almost problematic because our Webpack config says, oh, we're in development mode if nodeenv is the string development. But it looks like your nodeenv is just blank. Now, the reconciliation here is if we look at our package.json, the way that we actually run Webpack is in our start dev script. It actually sets nodeenv to development during the running of that script.
Right.
We should probably copy that into build client and build client and watch for future versions of Boilermaker. I don't know. It depends. We could punt on that. But while running start dev, nodeenv will be set to development, and therefore the Webpack config will run in the way we expect.
Yeah, in general, I can, for any shell command, I can do the same thing. So for instance, if I say, here is a variable that is not set. If I just prepend it at the beginning, ASDF equals, something else, then,
now, this is the funny thing. I've tried this before.
Well, maybe it doesn't work
and
with
it doesn't
echo.
work with echo.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Somebody who knows more shell scripting than myself, which I know you do, but somebody more than even you, apparently, would have to explain why it doesn't work with Echo.
Well, we can still do node. Let's see. I need to know how to run a node command. I think it's -e. Yeah.
Oh, nice. I didn't even know you could do that.
Yeah, right?
Cool.
Okay, so we're going to do the same thing, but instead of this, we're going to do node -e console.log process.env.asdf. Let's see if this works. Boom.
There you go. Yeah, so it does work there. It's weird that it doesn't work with Echo, right?
It is. That is unusual.
I'm not sure what's going on there, but
Echo
I would be interested
maybe,
to find out.
So there are, like if I just type help, Echo might be like a bash internal. It might not actually be, no, I guess not.
Oh, if you do which Echo?
Yeah, no, but I think you're right. It's, yeah. I don't know. Why doesn't it do that?
It's funny.
That's a mystery. I want to figure that
That'll
out.
be a good one to look up later. Okay, so while running start dev, our node env is development. Therefore, if we look at our Webpack config again, isDev will be true while we're developing locally. If it's true, we set the mode to development or production or whatever. It depends on our environment. The reason the mode is important is kind of what Dakota was talking about earlier. In production mode, Webpack does extra steps that take a little bit longer and generate a harder to understand file, but it's smaller and faster for the browser to download. This is minification, stuff like that. It makes it so that the resulting bundle is optimized for actual use in the app, as opposed to for development purposes, where we want to have easy debuggability and very fast rebuilds. All right, so we've got this entry point. There's a helpful comment here pointing out that the Babel polyfill entry point is an unfortunate extra bit of configuration needed to enable the async await syntax in Babel. And then we've got client index. So this is going to say we're going to make our bundle by starting at the client index file and following all of its imports and dependencies and spreading out as a tree or an acyclic graph or like from there and fusing those all into a bundle.js. But we're going to start at client index.
So why don't we start with the server, for instance?
Well, we are only going to run the server code in Node on our server machine. The bundle is going to be a separate program that all of our web users actually run. Right. So every web developer's job is to really write two programs, one that runs on the server and one that runs in the browser. That browser program is what we want to compile and translate down to the smallest, dumbest, oldest syntax so as many browsers as possible can run it.
Right. Cool.
We control the server, so we can run whatever code we want as long as we set it up properly. Once it's built that file, that bundle.js, it's going to put it out into public bundle.js. And it's also going to make it so that resolve there with extensions, you can require modules by name without specifying .js or .jsx, and it'll automatically know to just require those by name. DevTool source map, we're going to talk about that during the client side stuff, but that's building that bundle.js.map file, which makes it easier to debug. Instead of hearing something like, oh, you had an error on line 48,000 of bundle.js, Chrome will say, you had an error on line 17 of app.js. And even though the error actually did happen at line 40,000 of bundle, the source map tells the Chrome DevTools how to tell us where to go look in our source code to find that. And finally, we have, well, what are we actually doing while we're fusing these files together? Anytime there's a JavaScript or JavaScript X file, it's going to run it through Babel to do the translation, but not any of the node modules files. Those we're going to just allow to use the way they're already set up. And that's Webpack. So the only other question is, well, how are we translating things through Babel? And that's configured in our babelrc.
Great.
There are some helpful comments here, so we could just glance at it. But we've got three major plugins for Babel or presets. React is going to take any JSX, any of that domain-specific HTML looking like syntax that we can put in JavaScript, and compile it to react.createElement and react.createClass. Mm-hmm. Babel env is a rolling version of the Babel preset that keeps up to date automatically with the newest syntax. That's going to convert our new syntax into old syntax that more browsers can run. Finally, preset stage 2 is like bleeding edge. It's like even further than env. it's going to do stuff that's not even official JavaScript yet, but is on track to becoming official JavaScript. And the reason we put stage 2 in there specifically, if I remember correctly, was so we could do class-based arrow functions. Yeah. So if you didn't know, Dakota's showing us the TC39 committee is responsible for debating and ratifying new features in ECMAScript. And they go through several stages. 0 is like, I'm just spitballing here. There's specific rules for how it upgrades through the stages. By stage 2, the feature is pretty well planned out, but they're still nailing down things like edge cases and stuff like that. But the syntax is probably not going to change. By stage 3, it's pretty much defined. Like, it's not really going to change, but people are just making sure that it's fine. Like, they're testing it. And by stage 4, it is completely set in stone. It will be in the next version of ECMAScript when it's next published a year later.
Mm-hmm. And what was the one that you were talking about, the class arrows?
Yeah, so it might now no longer be in stage 2. It might have upgraded by now, but it's class properties. So specifically arrow functions as class properties. I don't remember what the name of it is. Static class fields, maybe? I don't know if it's that one. I can't remember what it is.
I don't know.
But it's so we can make bound instance methods in classes just by using arrow function syntax without having to say this dot instance method equals this dot instance method dot bind to this in our constructor all the time.
Cool.
Have we missed anything in our top level files? I think that's pretty much everything.
I can't think of anything else that we didn't say that we were either going to do later or... Oops, I'm in the wrong spot. Oh gosh.
Vim, you're so crazy.
Yeah, so we looked at babelrc, we looked at ESLint, we looked at Webpack.
Prettier. So Travis, we're going to take a look at a little later when we talk about continuous integration. The only remaining thing really is editorconfig. We'll take a quick look at it. It's pretty straightforward. The way editorconfig works is if you use an editor like WebStorm, for instance, by default understands editorconfig, or an editor that you configure to understand editorconfig. Visual Studio Code is an extension for this. Do you know offhand, does Vim come out of the box with support for it?
I think no, because let's see.
Vim predates the stuff by so much.
Well, it has.
But it's so extensible.
Right. So it has indent style, space, indent size 2, and those settings are not the same because if I go in, like we were showing earlier, if I just hit tab, it gives me a literal tab, which is my local Vim config.
Got it.
And I would be very surprised if there wasn't a way to configure Vim to this.
Oh yeah, Vim and Emacs, like the whole name of the game with them is configurability.
Yeah, right.
So if you have an editor that natively understands this, or you configure your editor to understand it, it will use an editor config to set the settings automatically while you're using that editor. So if you open up someone else's project and they have different settings from your defaults, it just works seamlessly and you automatically start using 4-space tabs or 2 spaces or whatever kind of indentation or other small editor configs that they want. So we see some nice editor integrations here. And there's Emacs, so
yeah,
Vim, there we go.
Of course.
Anyway, if we look at the actual settings, I mentioned that Prettier, if it doesn't find a setting in prettierrc, it'll go also check editor config. And so I put some settings in here and some settings in prettierrc with the idea that this would be a fallback that would also be used by some editors. And they're pretty straightforward things. It's like, okay, assume we want to use UTF-8 encoding, indent using space, 2 spaces, things like that.
Right.
That's pretty much it for our top level files, our top level scripts. Don't forget when you're starting the project, we're going to use npm run start dev, not npm start. And yeah, in our next version, next project, we're going to show you, I think, some backend code.
Yeah, we'll see how this actually gets generated. You can see my nice little hello world there.
Okay, see you in the next video.